California doesn't actually have a water shortage, it has a storage problem. In some years, the state is so dry that towns ration water, farms leave fields unplanted, and reservoirs sink to historic lows. Then, just months later, atmospheric rivers dump trillions of gallons of rain and snowmelt in a matter of weeks, flooding rivers, overwhelming dams, and sending enormous volumes of fresh water straight into the Pacific Ocean. For nearly a century, California's solution to water stress was simple: build another dam. And for a long time, that strategy worked. It created one of the largest agricultural economies on Earth and turned a mostly arid state into a food powerhouse. But today, building traditional dams has become politically, environmentally, and physically difficult. At the same time, climate volatility is accelerating. That combination has forced California into something it has never seriously attempted before: building a massive reservoir without damming a major river. A $6.8 billion project called Sites Reservoir. A lake that doesn't block fish, a lake that doesn't flood towns. A lake that only fills when there's surplus water. Supporters say it could become one of the most important pieces of California's future water security. Critics say it's an expensive gamble with real environmental consequences. So today we're breaking down what Sites Reservoir actually is, why California is betting on this unusual design, and whether it represents a smart adaptation to a changing climate, or another mega project that promises more than it can deliver. And if you enjoy deep dives into the infrastructure quietly shaping everyday life, make sure to hit that subscribe button. When people hear water crisis, they usually picture an empty sky with no rain and no snow. But California's real problem isn't how much water falls from the sky each year, it's when it falls. On average, California receives enough rain and snow annually to meet its total urban, agricultural, and environmental water needs. The issue is timing. Most of that water arrives in short, intense bursts during winter storms. Then long, dry months follow. California's water system was designed decades ago around a very different climate pattern. Historically, winter snowpack in the Sierra Nevada acted like a natural reservoir. Snow accumulated slowly, then melted gradually through spring and summer, releasing water at a steady pace into rivers and reservoirs. That slow-release system no longer behaves reliably. Warmer temperatures mean more precipitation falls as rain instead of snow. Snowpack melts earlier. Runoff happens faster. Rivers spike quickly and then drop just as fast. Modern storms now deliver water in violent surges, filling reservoirs rapidly and forcing flood managers to release water to prevent dam failures. When that happens, enormous volumes of fresh water rush straight out to sea. Then, months later, the state is back in drought. This mismatch between fast water arrival and limited storage capacity is the core of California's crisis. Compounding the problem, the population has nearly doubled since the 1980s, but large-scale water storage capacity barely grown. In fact, California has fewer operational reservoirs today than it did decades ago, thanks to sediment buildup, safety restrictions, and decommissioned facilities. At the same time, agriculture uses roughly 80% of California's developed water supply and produces a massive share of America's fruits, vegetables, and nuts. Urban growth, food production, environmental restoration, and climate volatility are all competing for a system that was never designed for this level of pressure. California isn't running out of water, it's running out of places to put it when it briefly has too much. But what are they doing to fix that? Say hello to Sites Reservoir. Sites Reservoir is not a traditional dam. It doesn't block a major river. It doesn't sit directly in the middle of a flowing channel. And it doesn't permanently trap water behind a massive concrete wall the way most of California's existing reservoirs do. Instead, Sites is being built as what's known as an off-stream reservoir. Rather than stopping a river, engineers are constructing the project inside a natural valley, roughly 80 miles northwest of Sacramento, surrounded by low mountain ridges and rolling hills. During major winter storms, when the Sacramento River is carrying far more water than cities, farms, and ecosystems can safely use, a portion of that excess can be diverted into the Sites Basin through large intake structures and pipelines. And this part is critical. Water is only taken when specific conditions are met. Downstream water rights must already be satisfied. Environmental flow requirements must be met. River levels must be high enough to qualify as genuine surplus. If any of those thresholds aren't reached, nothing gets pumped. When conditions allow, water flows into the valley and gradually fills the reservoir. When California enters dry periods, that stored water can be released back into existing rivers and canals, supplying farms, cities, and ecosystems when the state needs it most. At full capacity, Sites Reservoir will store about 1.5 million acre-feet of water. That's enough to supply several million households for a year or irrigate hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland. Physically, the reservoir will stretch roughly 13 miles north to south and about 4 miles east to west at its widest point. 2 main earth-filled dams along with several smaller saddle dams will seal the valley's low points, creating a massive storage basin without blocking a major river. And this design choice explains why Sites has survived politically when so many traditional dam proposals have failed. Fish migration routes remain open. The Sacramento River keeps flowing. No towns submerged, no major river canyon permanently flooded. It's basically a win-win, almost. Sites Reservoir avoids many of the problems that made traditional dams controversial, but avoiding old problems doesn't mean avoiding impact. The first trade-off is environmental. Even though Sites doesn't block a major river, it still floods land. Roughly 14,000 acres of grassland, oak woodland, and seasonal habitat will be permanently submerged. These landscapes support birds, mammals, and plant species adapted to open rangeland, not reservoirs. Some habitats can be recreated elsewhere. Other losses are permanent. There are also broader system-level concerns. Large reservoirs can generate methane as submerged vegetation decomposes. They can alter downstream water temperatures. They can change sediment and nutrient flows within river networks. Supporters argue these effects are manageable and far smaller than traditional dams. Critics argue they're cumulative, adding one more long-term stressor to an already strained ecosystem. The second trade-off, cultural. The Sites Valley overlaps lands with deep significance for indigenous communities. Tribal groups have raised concerns about impacts to ancestral territories, sacred landscapes, and cultural sites tied to identity and ceremony. Even when legal consultation requirements are met, cultural loss cannot be engineered away. The third trade-off, financial. Current estimates cost $6.8 billion, and that number has already risen from earlier projections. Participating water agencies shoulder much of the expense, and ultimately those costs flow to water users. Some projections suggest long-term water rates could rise substantially. Supporters counter that the cost of not building is higher, pointing to farm losses, drought spending, and economic damage. Critics respond that California has a long history of mega projects that grow far beyond their original budgets. And then the final trade-off, uncertainty. Sites only works when excess water exists to capture. If climate change produces longer dry periods and fewer large storms, the reservoir fills less often. If environmental regulations tighten, pumping windows shrink. Sites is not guaranteed to perform at its theoretical maximum every year. In short, Sites Reservoir is not a perfect solution. It's a calculated gamble, a bet that accepting environmental disturbance, high upfront cost, and long timelines is worth it in exchange for greater flexibility in a system under strain. The impact of a project this size goes beyond those trade-offs. Sites Reservoir is one of the most expensive water infrastructure projects in California history. But that price tag isn't just about concrete and pipelines. It's about who pays, who benefits, and how much risk California is willing to absorb to stabilize its water system. Funding comes from a hybrid structure. About a quarter of the cost is already committed from state and federal sources, like California's Proposition 1 water bond and federal water programs. The rest will be paid by more than 30 participating water agencies, purchasing long-term storage rights inside the reservoir. That setup is deliberate. These agencies are financially exposed. If costs rise, they absorb it. If Sites underperforms, they still pay. That creates a strong incentive to control costs and deliver efficiently. Now, zoom in locally. Sites is located in a sparsely populated agricultural region of Northern California. Construction is expected to generate thousands of jobs over multiple years. Operators, welders, engineers, truck drivers, surveyors, environmental monitors. Most of that labor is expected to come regionally, meaning steady paychecks flowing into communities that haven't seen this kind of investment in decades. Local contractors gain long-term work. Support businesses see increased demand. Housing, retail, and services all experience spillover growth. Then comes the long-term economic layer. Once operational, sites supports agriculture, food processing, storage, transportation, and exports across the Sacramento Valley. California agriculture generates tens of billions annually, and hundreds of billions when processing and exports are included. That entire engine depends on water reliability. When water becomes uncertain, farmers hesitate to plant. Processors delay upgrades, banks tighten lending, rural economies stall. Sites doesn't just store water, it stabilizes decision-making. It gives growers confidence to commit to long-term crops. It reduces the boom and bust cycle created by drought. Supporters argue that over time, the economic value of avoided crop losses, stabilized food supply, and reduced emergency drought responses can exceed the project's construction cost. Critics counter that those benefits are projections, not guarantees. Both sides are right. Sites is expensive, but so is doing nothing. California is choosing to spend billions upfront, rather than continue paying unpredictably during every future drought. Sites Reservoir is not a silver bullet. It won't end droughts, it won't make California immune to climate change, and it won't magically fix decades of strained water policy. But if it succeeds, California gains a major new buffer against volatility. If it fails, it becomes a cautionary tale of cost overruns, compromise, and misplaced confidence. So what do you think? Is Sites Reservoir a necessary adaptation to a changing climate, or an expensive gamble that won't deliver what's promised? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoy deep dives into the mega project shaping water, energy, and infrastructure around the world, hit that subscribe button.